Let me clarify. This happened during my college's Halloween celebration a few years ago, and is the most terrifying experience of my life. One of my roommates, some friends, and myself left to go to a party around dusk, and we were catcalled by a group of 3 drifters/homeless people. We thought nothing of it and went on our merry way. About 4 hours later, we're going back to our apartment to change shoes. High heels and messed up streets are hell when you've been drinking. When one of the drifters calls out to me, "Hey beautiful, how about a kiss?" Me being drunk and a little sassy, I reply, "No thanks, girls are more my type." To my shock and horror, he says, "Hey, my friend here likes the ladies." A homeless girl comes out of nowhere and proceeds to kiss me on the mouth. My friend picks me up and throws me over his shoulder. I proceed to flip the fuck out in my apartment, shrug it off, and we venture back out. Well, I got separated from my group in the crowd, and then I see the 3 drifters again. I try not to show that I'm shitting bricks when they ask me where they can find a liquor store. I point down the street to the Kroger, and they say, "Okay, you can show us." I'm a small woman, and they shoved me into their vehicle. I think, naively at the time, that they will literally let me out at the grocery store, except it's closed because it's after midnight. I plead for them to let me out of the car, but they keep saying, "The power does what it wants," and headed away from the safety of the campus area, onto the freeway and out of the state. For the next 4 hours, I visited 3 states with them while pleading for my life. I'll never forget how they kept saying, "The power does what it wants," and talking about how they're going to have fun with me. I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die, that I would never graduate college or see my family again. They pulled into a gas station and I slipped out of the vehicle, only to be grabbed again, but I screamed my head off for the clerk to come help. That's when they talked about taking me to the cliff. I mentioned that my family is full of police officers, and that they're probably already looking for me, how they're committing a federal crime, and that I won't press charges if they take me back to campus. I guess that's when the girl started to feel sorry for me, because she started to say, "Guys, she's really scared. Maybe we should just drop her off somewhere. This doesn't have to get any worse." They took me back to the campus area, and as soon as the girl pulled me out of the car, a police officer called my name. The girl shoved me toward the cop and yelled, "The power does what it wants, and tonight it lets you live." I've never been so happy to sit in the cruiser. They pursued them, but I don't know if they were ever caught. My roommate dropped out of college and joined the military, and I transferred to another school. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful walking at night. Always keep your cell phone with you if possible, and call the police if you see suspicious people near your apartment. I had a brush with death that day, and I'm so grateful for the time I have now. This could have been written better, but it's still something that's hard to talk about. Halloween has, unfortunately, never been a big deal out here in Scotland, and it's always bummed me out because I love Halloween. But after this year, I think I'll be happy never celebrating it again. My street and the next street over have a lot of young kids who go out trick-or-treating, so while I was out shopping all day with my mom, we decided to pick up some sweets in case anyone came to our door. I had plans to go to the cinema to see Ouija with my boyfriend, so when I got home I was getting myself ready to go out, and my mom was busy putting the shopping away. So when the first load of kids came to the door, I was the one who had to answer it. There were children from our street, the next one over, and some I couldn't recognize, as well as an adult at the end of the path. I guessed either a father or an older brother their size. They were dressed in all black and had some sort of mask covering their face, but it wasn't anything I recognized from a movie or anything. I was about to close the door when I noticed that the guy with the kids was still standing at the end of my path. He hadn't noticed and he wasn't watching the children either. He was looking right at me, and my skin started to crawl when I realized that he was just staring at me. I backed slowly into the house and watched him as he raised his hand and waved very slowly at me. I was about to call out to him when my mom came to the door to make sure I was alright, and then he took off in the opposite direction from the children. He hadn't been with them at all, and he left as soon as he realized that I wasn't home alone. I was completely freaked out and told my boyfriend all about it when he came to the house to pick me up, but I quickly forgot all about it when we were watching the movie. When I finally got home, it was getting really late, and trick-or-treating was well and truly over around here. When I got inside, my mom was getting ready to take the dogs out for a walk so that they could do their last-minute business, and they would meet my dad on his way home from work. I was going to be home alone. After my horrible encounter, posted on here, I don't really like being home alone, but it's worse on Halloween, and it always has been. Anyway, I was home alone, and I grabbed some snacks and went up to my bedroom and onto my computer so that I could do some of my writing, scroll through Tumblr, and listen to a bit of music. After my first creepy encounter with the guys coming into my house and into my backyard, my dad bought a motion-censored light and attached it to the wall of our house right outside my window. Normally it would go off whenever a cat walks along our fence, but it will usually go off after a couple of minutes. I always know when the light has come on because it lights up my whole room given where it's placed, and while I was sitting at my computer, the light came on. I ignored it at first because I knew that it would go off soon, but 5 minutes passed and it still hadn't gone off, so I opened my blinds to have a look outside and see what was going on. My stomach almost fell out of my ass when I looked out and saw the creep from hours before sitting on the fence, waving at my window to keep the light on. His waving slowed down suddenly when he spotted me, and it was all seriously creepy again and I didn't know what to do. I got flashbacks from before. Luckily, I heard the front door open and my parents coming into the house with the dogs, so I rushed down the stairs and started screaming at them about the guy on the fence. My dad didn't question me. He just took the dogs and rushed through the house, threw the back door open, and ran outside. Then I heard him shouting, "Get the fuck out of here, you creep! I'm gonna phone the police!" Dad scared him off, but I convinced him not to call the police because I didn't want to relive the whole thing again. I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about the whole night. This happened last year on Halloween. A lot of creepy stuff happens on Halloween, and this is no exception. I'm 5 foot tall, 105 pounds. Not a very intimidating figure. I'm transgender, and I look a little more on the feminine side of things. I was out on Halloween with my girlfriend at the time. We'd gone into the city, we're from a college out in a small town, to go to a haunted house, and we were walking back to the train station from the haunted house at about 12:30 a.m. to go home. We were both dressed up like witches, both wearing high heels, and I had my purse with me. My girlfriend's hands were cold, so I was holding her hand and walking very close to her. Yes, these are all important details. The city was almost like a ghost town as we were walking back. We saw almost nobody else. We were walking along a main road, just going under an overpass, when a car full of 20-somethings drove by us going the opposite way, and a guy hung out the window and shouted, "Ugliest lesbian couple ever." Of course, both of us were offended, but we just kept walking and the car drove up down the street. We were 2, maybe 3 blocks from the train station, and this train station is in the heart of the city with a lot of elevated highways and railways and overpasses surrounding it, so it tends to be very shadowed, especially at night. We heard the sound of a car engine off to our right, across the street, and at this point my girlfriend whispered to me, "It's the same car." I glanced over and it was the same car from earlier. The people had gotten out of the car and were kind of milling about it, but I could tell they were looking at us. I was very nervous at this point, because being both queer and transgender, you face a lot of potential violence and hate crimes. All the stories about trans people and lesbians and gays being beaten to death were flashing through my head. I was terrified. About a year ago, my dad had told me I had to carry something for self-defense, but instead of mace or something, he gave me a flashlight. It's about 8 inches and very sturdy, made of steel and incredibly bright. This thing will temporarily blind you for a good minute. I would know since I had accidentally blinded myself with it before. And it has a raised, beveled edge that would definitely hurt like a bitch if you were hit with it. I reached into my purse and pulled out the flashlight, gripping it tight in my free hand. There was the sound of breaking glass behind us, and both of us looked over our shoulders to see the group of people crossing the street towards us. There was broken glass on the street, and from what I could make out in the streetlights, one of the people was holding a broken beer bottle. I said to my girlfriend, "We need to get out of here now." We ran the remaining 2 blocks to the train station, but not very quickly because we were in high heels. The entire time we could hear the group running after us. Heavy steps, shouting slurs, maybe 50 feet behind us the whole way. When we got to the train station, we immediately bolted for the brightest area with the most people around, and looked around for this group, but they didn't come into the station. It hit me really hard right then how close we'd come to being statistics. I actually have 2 stories I'd like to share, but I'm waiting on permission to share one that happened to my best friend, which I was also heavily involved in. I'll start with the one that happened to my own family. Back in 2008, I think, I had graduated high school but was still living at my parents' house, along with my younger brother and sister, who at the time were in high school and junior high respectively. It was Halloween Eve, meaning the next day was Halloween, and we were all asleep in our beds. Now I have to tell you that although we lived in a nicest street, we lived in a town known for gangs and drug deals and random crazy weirdos. It was a little scary to hear gunshots and police sirens in the too close for comfort distance every night, but hey, it was home. Anywho, at about 4 a.m. I woke up to what sounded like a gunshot on our front porch, followed by shouting and violent pounding on our front door. I, being curious but also scared out of my mind, creeped up to the 2nd floor window and peered out at the front yard and an obstructed view of the porch. This was all I could see, and aside from hearing a regular stream of cursing and more pounding on the door, I had no clue what was going on for what seemed like hours, but in reality was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, and quite startlingly I might add, my brother came bursting into my room to ask if I was okay. I told him yes, but asked what was going on. He told me this. Some weirdo was at our front door. He had knocked on, aka tried to break down our door, and my dad heard and went to go see what was happening. He peered through the glass and saw a man on our porch, to which he asked what was wrong, without opening or unlocking the door. The man answered, "They're after me," repeatedly while glancing behind him. My dad, saying that there was no one behind him on the dimly lit street, asked if he would like to use our phone. He said yes, so my dad grabbed our house phone and handed it to him through the doorway he had cracked open. The man then tried to push his way in, but thankfully my dad stopped him and shut and locked the door. He then proceeded to call the police on the phone the man had opted not to take. That was just the story up to the point where my brother had come to check on me. At that point, the man had started screaming profanities, yanking the door handle back and forth violently, and pounding on the walls. And then I heard the shatter of glass. The man had taken a chair from our front porch and thrown it through the front window, which led to my parents' bedroom. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I was bawling at this point, knowing for sure that he was now in our house. And remember, I woke up to what I thought was a gunshot. I thought about how he was going to kill my parents first, then run up the stairs to kill me and my brother. My mind raced at all the horrible things that could be happening downstairs, when amazingly the police pulled up right at that moment. They immediately came into the house and detained the man. Apparently he had climbed through the window, cutting himself on the glass, and crawled on all fours through my parents' bedroom and through the kitchen. He finally ended up on our living room floor, where he just laid down and bled all over our carpet. He didn't have any weapons on him, despite my original theory of him having a gun. I guess I thought in my rudely awoken state that the pounding on the door was a gunshot. He was apprehended before he did anything to anyone in my family, thankfully. We think it was just some druggie who was hallucinating that someone was chasing him. No charges were filed, and we never saw the man again. After the police and ambulance left, my dad cleaned up what he could of the bloody mess, and we all went back to bed. Unfortunately, all of us had forgotten about my little sister, who was in a downstairs bedroom in the back of the house. No one had gone to check on her, and no one told her what had happened after it was all over, so she spent the entire night cowering under her blankets, thinking something could still be happening. Oops. We've since all apologized to her. So that's my story. Even though it was the most frightening experience of my life thus far, at least something good came out of it. Since he bled all over our carpets, our insurance paid for a new one, which we already desperately needed, and it was enough to carpet several rooms. Way more than were actually ruined, so I guess there's that. When I was 18, I worked at a local coffee shop in my hometown, and I often worked there picking up shifts and closing 6 nights a week. I had lots of regulars and lots of randoms, but other than maybe a few awkward orders, I never really had a problem with a customer being inappropriate or out of hand. This night was already really stressful for me, as it was Halloween. Not that it has anything to do with the interaction. But I had plans to go to a house that my friends rented right down the street after work, with some pastries and Red Bull, so I didn't really mind too much. It was about 9:45, and I was ready to close right at 10. It had been dead since about 8, and all I had to do was a final register count. Everything was clean, and I was reading a book to pass the time, trying not to watch the clock. Our counter, by the way, is like a bar counter. Long, with the register near the door at the closed end, and with the one far end open for us to go in and out of, right near the door to our back room. The man walked in the front door. He looked about mid-20s. He was black and had on a big hoodie, and was wearing sweatpants that sagged down so I could see the waistbands of 2 different pairs of gym shorts underneath. I'm a young white female, but I have no fear of people and I'm not racist, so I didn't bat an eyelash when he walked in with one hand in a hoodie pocket and the other in the pocket of one of the pairs of gym shorts. Men of all races wear clothes like that and carry themselves that way, at least where I live. So with no concern, I greeted him and asked him how he was and what he was thinking of ordering. He took his time responding, but wasn't looking at the menu or at our chalkboard with seasonal drink offers. He was looking at the front door. He took about a minute, then turned to me and asked my name. I often had male customers ask this, female ones too, so I told him, and then asked again when he was looking to order. He began to ask more questions about me and my job. He asked if I liked it. I responded, thinking maybe he wanted a job application, and gave him a very short version of how I felt. It was almost 9:50. I kept checking my phone, thinking that I just wanted to make his drink so I could clean up again and meet my friends. He nodded, saying he thought I liked my job, which I thought was strange, but again I didn't think too much of it. I agreed again. He then started to ask about the shifts I worked. I figured he had sympathy that it was Halloween, and I gave him a vague answer. He then asked why I didn't work on Thursdays. My heart jumped. I didn't see that one coming from a mile away. I struggled to respond, and he continued, and asked if Sunday mornings were better than Wednesday nights. At this point, I broke into nervous laughter and smiles, asking him if he was looking for work at the coffee shop, and that we needed the help. He stopped smiling at this point, and his hand in the hoodie pocket made an abrupt move to the very inside pair of gym shorts, basically so that he would be grabbing himself. He didn't quite reach in all the way, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I asked him to order or leave, as the end of our business day was almost there, and that I needed to clean and lock up. At this point, I grabbed my cell phone and kept it in my hand, thinking, how can I dial 911 and not have him begin to molest himself in front of me, or whatever he planned on doing? He began to sort of lean on the counter and ask me questions. He asked me where I lived. Did I have a boyfriend? What were my plans for that night? I was trying hard not to cry, and tried my best to lie through more vague answers, hoping he would go away if I didn't just freak out. He began to move away from the register, still leaning on the counter, hands in his pants, towards the open end of the bar. I began to back as far towards the front door as possible, but that end had no opening, and was so high I couldn't jump it without considerable effort and climbing over an espresso machine. The only other exit I could think of was our narrow drive-through window. Clutching my phone, I asked him what he wanted. For some reason, he stopped. He stood up and looked towards the front door, then turned to look at the clock behind him. I took the chance to start writing a text message to my friend and said, "If I'm not at your place in 10 minutes, call the police." The man caught me sending the text and asked me who I was texting. I told him it was my boyfriend, and his face became something I'll never forget. His eyes blazed and he was still a stone. He calmly told me to throw my cell phone across the floor, specifically telling me to try and throw it to the drive-thru. I had to really toss it about 9 feet away. After, he began to scream, making his way again down the counter. He asked me how I could have a boyfriend when he was watching me at work for the last 2 months as often as possible, and had never seen a man drop me off or pick me up from work. He pointed to the side of the building that I had parked on, and said he knew I parked my blue Toyota there earlier, and not to lie to him. I asked him to leave and began to cry. He began to describe my work shifts to a T. When I came in, when I left, how I smoked across the street on break. He told me that he knew I only drank the Diet Coke that we sold, and that I always cranked my music up when I started my car. At that point, he pulled a small gun out of the gym shorts and waved it around as he said that I was stupid to lie to him, that he knew it all. He was going between enraged and laughing, as if he couldn't believe that I didn't want to talk to him, or that it was funny that I was scared. I offered him all the money in the register, and he laughed again, hysterically, and then again went still. He said, and I'll never forget this moment, "I'm not here for any money, Marina. I'm not here for a job. I think you know what I'm here for." I was sobbing at this point, and it made him either frustrated or sympathetic, and he began to say how I just needed to calm down, that he was just really excited to meet me. He still had one hand down near his dick and began to fondle himself, holding the gun with the other hand, and about 3 feet away from the opening in the bar. I asked him again to please leave. When he didn't move, I asked him what I did to him, and why this was happening. He began to speak, saying that I was very pretty. He was continuing to talk when all of a sudden my friend walked in the door with his friends in tow. There were 5 guys all together, and all in a metal band together, so they were a pretty distinct group of guys. The man quickly put the gun in his pocket, so quickly that only 2 of my friends noticed it. He ran for the door, pushing past my friends, and disappeared into the night. I threw up as soon as he was gone, and 2 of my friends ran out after him, but didn't gain on him enough and didn't see where he went to. I quit my job the next day and called the police. There was never any follow-up, and I still wonder about what the fuck did or didn't happen to me that night. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out, because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over, because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating, so that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 o'clock almost all of the candy was gone, my brother and I decided that we'd eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home. I assumed that it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater, because he wasn't wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed almost desperate for us to open it, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I knew immediately who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much from the information we had given them, since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt for the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. This means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. This is my first time posting anything here, but I feel like I have an interesting story to share. I've always wanted to turn it into a book or something, but I've been super busy with school. To start out, this story takes place on and off again throughout most of my life. It starts out as a typical, my parents got a divorce when I was young situation, but it unfolded into so much more. In fact, I'm still picking up the pieces of everything that happened. Just a warning, this is a super long story. I don't blame you if you lose interest halfway in. There's a lot of backstory that I feel is important to understanding what happened. As it stands now, my father is dead. It was ruled a suicide, but I think that was only half of what happened. I'll talk about everything that led up to this, but more importantly, I believe that Mary definitely had a hand in what happened. My mother and father divorced when I was around 4. Almost everyone I know has gone through some sort of similar situation. I have 2 brothers, one older and one younger. We saw him about every other weekend. He paid child support, you get the gist. One weekend visit, my father introduces us to a woman he's seeing named Mary. Her eyes and hair are dark and her skin is pale. She had an obsession with the color red. Something was immediately off to me, but I didn't really start to know what she was capable of until later. I didn't know it at the time, but Mary is one of the main reasons my parents got divorced. My father cheated on my mother with her. He met her while he was working as a waiter at a Red Lobster. When he moved over to his career at a casino as a slot machine repairman, she followed. Mary would follow my dad anywhere. They got married pretty quickly after my mother and father divorced. I never even knew there was a wedding until later. My mother hated her, but she never badmouthed my father or Mary in front of my brothers and I. She thought that it was important for us to make the judgments for ourselves, even if this woman was part of the reason her marriage was broken up. We continued to visit what was now Dad and Mary's house on our scheduled time with Dad. I always associated their house with red. The house was always decorated with strawberries. Mary liked red sheets. She had red sweaters and pants. It was weird. Mary was just unnecessary drama for a while. Things like buying us toys that we could only keep at Dad and Mary's house, or saying that she and my father wanted custody of us instead of my mom. I feel like these things were harmless in a way. Every divorcing couple probably has some sort of variation. Things carried on like this for a couple of years. We would have a special variation of Christmas or Easter or whatever, aside from what we celebrated with my mom. I was about 7 or 8 when I remember the first incident that confirmed that I knew this wasn't right. My little brother was a super curious child, and he was about 4. He had scooted a dining table chair to the fridge to get a cereal box on top, and when he reached up, he pulled down a handgun instead of a cereal box. I panicked and got my dad, who acted really funny about it. My memory is fuzzy, but I remember getting home early that weekend. My dad didn't know the gun was there because it was Mary's. It was at this point that my mom started to have trouble with us going over there. My father got worse about being able to come pick us up. He was unreliable for the most part to begin with, but I know that he was 10 times worse when he was around Mary. My mom told me later, when I was much older, that Mary called our house around the time of the gun incident and said, "I want your life." My mother is a really tough lady. She grew up in East LA in California. This scared her. She was going to get a restraining order soon. I guess what Mary meant was that she wanted my mom's stability. Even as a single mom with 3 kids, she was doing very well for herself, and even dating. But even so, how long had she obsessed with my mom before she and my father ever got divorced? What did that even mean? Not long after the phone call, my mom heard her car being smashed into one night. Someone had taken a brick and smashed the driver window. Nothing was taken, but I know it was Mary. We had no way to prove it, but I just know. My dad and Mary had a baby. Her name is Madison. I only remember holding and playing with her for so long. I can't imagine all the shit she's been through. My mom met and married my stepdad pretty soon after that, and they decided that it would be best to move to Florida. We had other family there, and there weren't many jobs where we were living in Tennessee. I don't remember any problems at all when we were so far from my dad and Mary. We stayed for about a year, and then moved back to Tennessee. My stepdad was able to get a better job again, and we were closer to my mom's parents. This is when the phone calls started. As soon as we moved back, we would get phone calls where someone would just listen for a few minutes and then hang up. The numbers were always blocked, but I'm sure it was her. She always knew where we lived because she started seeing my dad again. The calls continued for years. It became like an inside joke. We all knew who it was, but there wasn't anything we could do. My father denied it any time we asked it about it, and always took her side. We fell into this thing where my mom was the bad guy, and any time I questioned my dad and Mary's behavior, they were sure my mom was putting me up to it. Things escalated one night when my dad came to pick us up for a visit. My mom and Mary ended up getting into a fist fight, where Mary swung first, and my mom punched her so hard she fell backwards. My brothers and I watched from the apartment we were living in at the time. My mom immediately went to the police, but my dad and Mary never even called. My mom didn't press any charges, and the whole incident sort of faded away. We ended up moving into a big house a while after that, where we still are today. Dad and Mary started to have problems and split up. I thought maybe she would be gone for good, or at least gone for the most part, but she never really went away. My dad started to become a person we could somewhat rely on again when she was gone. I got to know my little sister more, the baby they had, and things were okay. She started coming around again, though. Whenever she was with my dad in front of us, she would whisper in his ear. My dad would drink more. He became physically ill-looking and would start to gain weight. We could always tell when Mary was around because the difference was so drastic. He even officially divorced her at one point, but it was obvious that they still got together on and off. My brothers and I went on with our lives, and we became too old for visiting the way we were. Whole weekend visits became just going to see my dad for an evening. The whole time, however, the phone calls never stopped. They weren't as frequent, but they were there in the background, like a reminder that she was always there lurking. When I got into high school, visits from my dad just about stopped altogether. We usually talked on the phone here and there, and I saw him when I had events like a marching band competition or a formal dance, milestones like graduating from high school. It was pretty common to go a while without hearing from him sometimes. Mary was only a thought. I hadn't seen her in years. I never saw her anywhere at all. The phone calls had stopped, but only because we had gotten rid of the house phone. I was a freshman in college, and I remember being right around Halloween of 2009. I was shopping with my aunt for some cheap decorations at Walmart by my house. I saw a woman walking slowly behind us, and my aunt and I both did a double take. It was Mary, and she was totally following us around the store. She looked like she was maybe 50 years older than when I had last seen her, and her clothes were disheveled. My aunt kept elbowing me to go talk to her because we weren't exactly sure if this was really her. It could have been someone who just looked kind of similar. I worked up the nerve and went up to her. "Is your name Mary?" I asked. "Yes, it is. Hi, Samantha, how are you?" Using my name like that really caught me off guard. She knew who I was and wasn't bothering to talk to me. She didn't even act like she was being caught. I asked her if she had talked to my dad lately because it had been a while since I'd heard from him. She swore up and down that she hadn't for months, which I later found out was a lie. This was the beginning of my dad going missing. After I saw her, something happened, and it's hard to pin down what, but he completely disappeared. His cell phone was shut off, and when I called his work at the casino, where he'd been working for 15 years, they said he was no longer working there, and couldn't tell me why. My mom and brothers and I called the police to file a missing persons report. We didn't have to wait because it had already been several weeks since we'd last heard from him. They helped us make a flyer and we looked and asked all over. Everything led back to Mary most likely being the last one to see him. By the time we started talking to her, it was mid-November. My mom and I called Mary, and she would tell us that she had in fact seen my dad one night after Halloween. Mary told us that he was making a noose, and this would be the last time anyone ever saw him. We honestly didn't know what to believe. My dad was an alcoholic, and it wasn't uncommon for him to say dramatic stuff, but we'd never considered suicide. When we told the detectives what Mary told us, they had her come in for questioning. She had told the detectives a completely different story, and her dates kept changing. There wasn't any evidence of anything, though, so there wasn't much they could do. The detectives did, however, tell us that we shouldn't talk to her anymore. To quote them, "We don't know what she's capable of." Things went on like this until they found him on January 4th, 2010. My dad was found dead in a storage unit. He had pulled his car in, shut the door, and let it run until he died, and he had been there for 63 days. There were several suicide notes, all dated for November 2nd. one for my mom, and one for each of his children. But there was an especially long note from Mary, where he doted on her and talked about what a wonderful woman she was. The suicide note even said for her to take any insurance money and use it on herself. The date on the notes was so close to the date where Mary said she had seen him. There are a million things that could have happened, but I know that she had something to do with it. Even if my father really did kill himself, I know that she helped push him over the edge. I'm not one to just blame someone. I know my father was a troubled man. He was an alcoholic and he was depressed for most of the time because of Mary. But there's something so frustrating and horrendous about this woman, and there's zero evidence for me to prove anything against her. She wasn't allowed to come to the funeral. My mom and parts of his family put everything together. There wasn't anyone he knew that hadn't heard of her, and everyone felt that she was a bad woman. I found a Facebook profile of hers months after they found my dad. There were only 5 or 6 photos of her, and some guy obviously happy, and they were all dated for January 4th, 2010. The next year on January 4th, 2011, she showed up at my family's house. We didn't let her in the house, and she kept saying something about having some stuff of my dad's in the car. We told her to leave or else we would call the police. That night, someone put red tissue paper in and around our mailbox. Even the next year, 2012, she called my mom and asked her to meet her in a Sonic Burger parking lot. She said she had a box of my dad's stuff to give us. My mom made my stepdad go instead of her, but she never showed. I feel like she wanted to do something bad to my mom. The next year we didn't hear from her. I did some research and it turns out she was put in jail for making meth. It made a lot of sense for some things, but I still have so many questions and issues that are unanswered. Supposedly she was let out sometime last year. The correctional facility she was at has a website, and it says she was let out for good behavior and rehab. I found a different Facebook that showed her with some other family. God help them if she's pulling the same crap as she did with mine. I just wanted to update this while it's still fresh in my mind. My brother received a visit from Mary in person. My little brother works at a video game store. It was around 8 p.m. last night, and Madison, Mary's daughter, came in to buy a video game. My brother was shocked and he didn't recognize her. She introduced herself and my little brother couldn't do much. She asked for his phone number, but my brother didn't end up giving it to her because he had a weird feeling in his stomach. She took what she bought and left, and my little brother thought that was the end of it. But maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, she walks in again with Mary by her side. My little brother immediately recognized her and started to panic. Mary and Madison stood at the back of the store whispering to each other. He said that they were both smiling the whole time, and a couple of times they giggled to each other. Mary then looked him right in the eyes and started to head towards the counter my brother was behind. He said that he felt so angry and his heart started to race. Instead of trying to confront her, he walked into the back of the store and let his coworker ask if he could help her. Maybe 10 minutes later, she was gone, and the coworker told him that she had left without asking for anything. My brother thinks she was just making her presence known, and that she thought she could catch up with him like they were friends or something. I just know that I don't want this woman in my life anymore. I don't want her harassing my family members and I want to move as far away as possible. We documented this incident with the police department, and they said that if it happens 3 times, then we can file for a restraining order. I don't really know what else to do. Anyway, I just thought this might be something you guys are interested in hearing. As much as I thought it would finally be over, she pops right back up again. It's not enough for her that my dad is dead. I guess she wants to have the last word. She always wanted to have the upper hand. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story that you'd like to send in, or if you'd just like to message me sometime, go ahead and take a look in the description below. There will be links to all of my social media accounts, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter account. go ahead and check any of those out and send me a message, and I'll try to include your story in a video or get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline the name of the story and any possible themes it might have, as well as how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in today's video, you can go ahead and check down there in the description. The music is always listed in the description below in the order which it appears. I also name the tracks and provide links to the artists if you feel like checking out more of their work. Last but not least, if you guys have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.